Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for June 3rd, 2021. Well, we're moving into the midst of a season of summits coming up. And as is often the case, there's a lot of turbulence preceding them, and we have to keep an eye on the possibility for lying reports, false flags, and real provocations, which has preceded almost all of the summits which occurred during especially the Trump presidency. These summits include the Group of Seven Summit, which will be in Cornwall in the United Kingdom on June 11th to 13th, the NATO Summit, which will be shortly afterwards, June 14th in Brussels, and then on June 16th, the Putin-Biden Summit in Geneva. Now, especially keep an eye on the United Kingdom, the British Empire, because it's the Brits who are most out front in trying to prevent any positive relationship developing between the United States and Russia. It was the British component of Russiagate which took the lead, beginning with GCHQ, MI6, the PP dossier of former MI6 operative Christopher Steele, and so on. The role of British-based operatives in trying to set up Michael Flynn, Papadopoulos, Carter Page, and others. This is clear, and it was unfortunately never fully exposed. While we got a lot of news about Comey, some about Brennan and Clapper, the role of the Brits in this largely passed unnoticed. And this is a real problem because it's the British geopolitical doctrine and neoliberal economics which underlies the desire to keep sovereign states from collaborating and in fact is involved in the destruction of sovereign states through the so-called Great Reset and the Green New Deal. So just keep an eye out for these false flags and make sure that you're not falling for them. Now let's start with the NATO. There was a defense and foreign ministers meeting of NATO which just took place, and this included a whole series of discussions about the alleged threat from, quote, hostile states like Russia and China. Leading this was Dominic Raab, the British foreign minister, who said the United Kingdom is supporting and reinforcing NATO to take on the challenges from, quote, hostile states like Russia. What Raab, I guess it is emphasized, is the importance of confronting the Russians in Eastern Europe, the NATO maneuvers, building up NATO forces. You know, the British, meanwhile, are sending one ship or a small group of ships to the South Pacific, to the Indo-Pacific region, but they have to borrow planes for their aircraft carriers from the U.S. Marine Corps. They're planning on increasing expenditures for upgrading their nuclear arsenal. But the British Army is not what it once was, but the British Empire continues, as we'll get to in just a moment. Also, NATO will be taking up what's called the 2030 initiative of its General Secretary Stoltenberg, which also is based on the idea, prepare to confront systemic challenges from Russia and China. Tony Blinken was at this meeting, and he reasserted the importance of defending the so-called rules-based order, which is a phony concept based on the idea that the City of London and Wall Street use U.S. military power backed up by NATO to enforce rules which are designed to benefit the City of London and Wall Street and not the rest of the world. Now, that's the NATO summit coming up. Just preceding it is the G7 summit. And this has a particular focus. It's in Cornwall, United Kingdom, so it's presided over by Boris Johnson. And he announced that he and Biden are going to use this to pull together something called the Alliance of Democratic States. Now, this is part of his idea of global Britain, which is another attempt to remake the British Empire with its commitment to colonialism, a new colonialism, which under the guise of helping countries will continue to exploit them and steal from them. An example of this is the former Bank of England director, Mark Carney, who is now one of the leading green gurus of the United Nations. Carney is trying to put together a fund for a carbon offset market in which Western companies will be allowed to put forward money to African countries to buy their carbon-based credits. That is, the African countries will not be allowed to develop, so they'll be more carbon neutral, and they can sell that carbon neutrality to Western corporations. It's an absurd concept, but what's it part of? It's part of a huge green financial bubble, because the real issue in the so-called Great Reset and this new global initiative is the destruction of sovereign nations and the moves to prevent them from developing. And this is the clear aspect of what we're dealing with. Now, it's coming at a moment when there's a hyperinflation that's coming with like an out-of-control freight train. The Bloomberg Commodities Index, for example, the price index is up nearly 50% this year. Now, they're telling us there's 2 to 2.5% inflation, but listen to some of these figures. Timber prices, which are necessary for construction, have quadrupled year on year. Oil prices have doubled. Corn prices have more than doubled because corn is used for biofuels. So some of the major components, and then of course food prices, are soaring, especially in the United States. As we're shutting down beef production in the United States, shutting down cattle ranchers, the cost of beef is going up to consumers, but the prices paid to cattle ranchers continue to drop. So we're headed for a food crisis, and it's noteworthy that some of the leading so-called packaging plants, like the one that was just shut down with the supposed Russian hack, that they're at the same time their prices are going up, they're pushing fake meat. So, and the line is from Bloomberg, meat is the new coal. In other words, it's the cause of pollution. So this is what we're seeing from on the economic side of things. Now, we also have from the Group of Seven what they're calling the Clean Green Initiative. And this is to counter the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, the idea is that they'll offer economic infrastructure programs that don't have a carbon footprint. In other words, no new roads, no bridges, no canals, no waterways, no ports, no high-speed rail, no power plants and electrical production. So what is it? What is this Clean Green Initiative? I guess we'll have to wait and see. But I think it should be seen that this is part of the global central bankers' dictatorship, which is coming online with the Great Reset and the Green New Deal. Now, at the same time, we have a rewrite of history underway. This is typical. I mean, George Orwell, in his 1984 novel, the protagonist, Winston Smith, what's his job? Rewriting old newspaper articles to conform to the new narratives. Well, that's what we're seeing now from Chatham House, which just put out a lengthy report claiming that the story of what's going on, or what went on in 1989, 1990, 1991, about the deal that was made for German reunification, that was stated by James Baker and others in the Bush administration, there would be no eastward expansion of NATO. Chatham House said that never happened. That was never done. And yet the U.S. archives show it. The memoirs of key people involved in it show that there was an agreement for no NATO eastward expansion. Why is Chatham House trying to do this? Well, they're going for regime change in Belarus. They're trying to bring Ukraine into NATO. And ultimately, their target is regime change in Russia. Now, the same Chatham House is also sponsoring a project to counter President Putin's call for historians to delve deeply into the causes of World War II. And to what Putin is saying is you'll find that there was an agreement among certain Western interests, namely the cartel arrangements, the trusts, to put Hitler in power. And this was designed to attack Russia. So we'll see more coming out on that. Now, finally, there's the Danish spy story, and I'll just mention a couple points about this. This is not new. It was revealed in 2013 that Danish secret services were working with the National Security Agency of the United States to bug the phones of European leaders, most prominently Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany. And Merkel said, friends don't do this to friends. Well, is the NSA anybody's friend other than the deep state and the globalists? But the importance of this story is it was exposed in 2013. The evidence came from material delivered by Snowden. Again, in 2015, journalists picked up the story, and each time, nothing happened. Now, this time, the whistleblower went to the press in some of the Nordic countries and globally to say once again, why has nothing been done to stop this spying? And what you're looking at is the security state, the purpose of which is to grab every piece of communication from everyone on the planet to conduct a global spy operation. And it's not just to spy on you, it's to manipulate you and control you, to get your profile. So this is something that should be a huge issue. Why has no one gone to jail yet? I mean, how is it that the United States can justify tapping the cell phone of the Chancellor of Germany? Well, that's something somebody should have to answer for. Now, finally, something we'll be looking at over the next week or so. It appears as though the era of Benjamin Netanyahu, the greater Israel expansionist prime minister, has come to an end. Now, that doesn't mean he's through. And it's clear that you can look back at what just happened in Gaza to see this was his plan to make himself seem indispensable. And yet a new coalition is emerging. It will go before the Knesset next week. Netanyahu himself is facing a significant trial on charges of corruption. But don't count him out yet. He's a very desperate and dangerous person. And this is we haven't seen the end of him. But it could be the end of an era. So that's the report I have for today. I will see you again tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll take your questions, so send them to me at harleysch@gmail.com. I'm sure you have lots of questions, so don't be shy. Send them off to me and I'll take them up. So thanks for joining me. See you tomorrow.